kick off. So today we are at our week 17 of Community Connect, which basically means that now we have been in a form of lockdown for us in South Africa for 17 weeks. It feels like a lifetime. We would have already had our SAPIX annual conference in Cape Town, which hasn't happened. We are very sad about it, but at the same time, we've had lots of new and exciting things taking place over the last couple of weeks, and we've got lots of exciting things coming up in the next couple of weeks. So before I start, I just want to say congratulations to Dave Hudson, who's in the session here, on being voted onto the SAPIX board. Caught him out while he was eating there. And I think a very big thank you to all of the SAPIX team and the Uphaven team that run behind and do all these good things to keep this stuff going. I think that they are running themselves ragged. We've had to change the way we do business. We've had to ramp things up. We've had to adapt. It's not necessarily been a very difficult transition, but obviously it's a transition and it's different. So it's also not easy when you're working from home with children, all those things. I'm sure I don't need to tell any of you, you all know. So given all that, I think that they are doing a superb job. And I would just like to say thank you to all of you at SAPIX. So today's topic is ethical supply chains. And this is a topic we could probably talk about for hours or days if we really got into it, but we don't have that. We have an hour, so we've got to keep it short and sweet. So here we go. Don't be shy, say hello. Is there anybody that's voluntarily going to put up their hand and say hello? Or am I going to have to call you out and pick on someone?
Hi all, Sharon from Berry.
Hello, Sharon. Welcome. Thanks for being here with us. And I know the
afternoon all.
Who was that?
Afternoon, Stephen. Stephen from Cape.
Hello, Stephen. Welcome back. It's not your first time with us, is it?
No, but I think I've missed about 2 or 3 sessions. That's it now.
Okay. And we're gonna. Ivan's gonna say hi.
Hi everybody, it's Ivan here from Optimized Works.
Hello, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll leave people alone. I'm glad that people volunteered today, so I didn't have to call them out on it. Okay, so let's get into the topic at hand. So if we look at the basic definition of an ethical supply chain, an ethical supply chain focuses on the need for corporate social responsibility working to produce products and services in a way that treats its workers and the environment ethically. So I think that's the definition is very, very basic term. And I think it expands far beyond that, much further beyond that. So we're going to unpack a little bit more of that. And I really am hoping for some discussion on this because this affects each and every one of us. None of us are exempt from this. And we all ultimately have a responsibility in it. So an ethical supply chain is more of a practice than a definition. It's something that needs to be happening. It's not a talk shop. And it operates in a way that delivers the highest levels of ethical and sustainable operations. So if we look at eliminating child and slave labor, this is a topic that for me is not covered nearly as much as it should be. In fact, we will be running a webinar later on in September, I think, on modern labor and how much it's still very, very much in practice and where it's happening. I think specifically Africa, we have a problem with that, but obviously it's a round the world problem. Safe and hygienic working conditions. I guess you wouldn't believe that that's a real challenge, because a lot of the people that we interact with, I think, work for the bigger organizations. But I'm guessing that there are some organizations that don't take this seriously. fair pay and working hours, anti-bribery and corruption. That's the one that we really hone in on the most. I think that as South Africans and Africans, we win that one hands down. Nobody can compete with us there. Ethical sourcing and procurement, that's another one. We've got that one tapped. If anybody needed to learn how to do it, you just step in our direction. Environmental awareness and sustainability, and that is becoming more and more prevalent in terms of supply chains and what businesses need to be doing to incorporate this into their organizations and practice what they preach, so to speak. So if you think about ethical, you don't always think about the environmental side of it. We always think about that as the green or sustainable bit, but this all sort of lumps together into this ethical supply chain that we speak about. So if we look at our customers, you know, days gone by, the customer bought the product, there was no questions, there was no reason for them to question or doubt where the products were coming from. But now they know more about what's going on and what to expect. So they want ethical supply chains. If you look at the millennials, as many as 9 out of 10 will swap brands to one they believe to be more ethical. I will not forget attending a session with Graham Codrington. And he was talking about his daughter. At the time, she was quite young. And they were driving down the highway and this truck came past and it was just puffing smoke out of it. And I'm not going to name the company, but she looked at that. She took one look at it and she said, just look at that. Look what it's doing to the air and to our earth. I'm not going to buy their products anymore. And she was a little girl. So if the children are starting to think that way, then you must know it's got to change. There's an opportunity worth 996 billion for organizations that adopt an ethical approach throughout their business. That is a big number, a big number. So we really need to park the idea that there's money to be had in going the ethical route rather than it costing us money, because I think there is a perception that it costs rather than we stand to gain. Consumers are willing to pay as much as 25% more for products that are ethical and sustainable. And you'll find a lot of people that will go to Woolworths, for example, will only buy, you know, their grain-fed chicken breasts or whatever the case is. And there's a fee attached to that, and that's where that 25% sits. So there's a lot more people going that route because it's the right thing to do. Obviously, it's not economically viable for many of the households, or most of the households in South Africa, but it's definitely something that consumers are starting to identify with. And 66% of people are willing to pay more for goods that have a positive social and environmental impact. That's also a big number of people. So it's no longer the case anymore that you just go to the shop and you buy what's on the shelf. There are questions to be asked about those products. Where are they coming from? How did they get there? What was the supply chain involved in getting that product to the shelf? So what do consumers want? They want to take a stand on issues they care about, such as sustainability, transparency, and fair employment practices, which stands to reason. That they meet ethical standards related to environmental stewardship, sustainable sourcing, reducing waste, and better working conditions. So sustainable sourcing is an interesting one. If we look at that from a COVID-19 perspective, how much of our ethical purchasing went out the window when we were in a rush to buy PPE equipment? You know, were we cognizant of the fact that we were buying from suppliers that we possibly didn't know anything about? So that sort of challenge, the COVID-19 would have some sort of impact on this and us going against our ethical buying power or behavior. So do you need an ethical supply chain? And I mean, I think this goes without saying, it's an obvious yes. It can help you to build a better reputation, long-term loyalty, and a better customer experience. And it can help boost the bottom line, as I've mentioned before. So if you look at reputational damage, if there is an organization, and I think somebody spoke about it, it might actually have been Grant in the session we had yesterday, of an organization that was found to be ethically questionable. Their reputation was in tatters. The money they lost was millions and millions, hundreds of millions, and to earn that reputation back is not easy. So if you take a big ticket brand and suddenly you find out that there's all sorts of child labor and all sorts of horrible things that go on behind the scenes, are you going to support the product, or are you going to steer clear of it? And most people will steer clear of it. In most cases, we'd like to hope that that's the case in any event. So let me ask the question, how many of you here would say, without a question of a doubt, that your company to some degree practices ethical supply chain disciplines, has processes and procedures to govern that? Split up a hand or do the clapping hand thing. Because if nobody puts up their hand, then I'm going to be seriously concerned. Okay, Daniel, thank you. Ivan, you want to add some comments here?
Yes, I think what's been quite interesting, how I've seen it in the market, being a branch manager and helping clients on procurement and importation of goods, is a lot of the factors that drive the decision making for individuals is not necessarily the ethics around where those goods come from. It comes with the cost of the item and the urgency of having the item available when they need it. That as of recent, this week, I was introduced to a client that had to change his entire supply chain to get commodity because the Germans decided that from an ethics point of view, they're not comfortable with how this product is being sourced. That the client had no other choice but to take product from a supplier that ethically is questionable. So it's one thing that, you know, the guys abroad are looking at this saying that we won't deal with those suppliers, but at the end of the day, if your company is built on providing a product to a market and you haven't looked at alternative sourcing, you're in a bit of trouble. And maybe to get to the point, but I think you really have to put the work in and to find different suppliers. The COVID thing has identified the fact that many of us don't have backup plans for different sourcing points. So it starts with the business itself that says, I will not buy that and I will be prepared to maybe take a high cost to the product. And then understanding where that product comes from. Because there are companies in South Africa that are very strict at where those goods are being bought. And you have to show the chain all the way back from manufacturer. So it's your responsibility, if you don't mind me saying, you have to start somewhere, and it starts with all of us. Unfortunately, we all are pushed for a price in a market to sell a product, and what's going to win at the end of the day is that cost to sell. So yeah, that's just what I've picked up and I've noticed. As much as I would want to close my eyes and say, I don't know where the product is coming from, you know, you have to make that choice.
No, thanks, Ivan. You're 100% correct there. And it is down to a lot of it's down to sourcing and know where the products are coming from. Daniel, you're off mute. I know you want to contribute here as well.
Yeah, the thing about cost, that cost in supply chain drives up, or the ethics drives up the cost. That is, in my view, is a myth. It's companies just believe that is the case. And we're talking supply chain today. The irony of it within companies is that many companies really do not know who owns supply chain. Let me tell you today, supply chain owns ethics. Supply chain owns it. And there's no question about it. And I'll quote you some stats in a recent survey or study that was done when companies were approached and being asked who is responsible for the ethics in the company. 31% of the respondents indicated to some sort of a supply chain function, because supply chain guys, the procurement guys, the logistics guys, the fabricator, they deal with suppliers, they deal with clients, they deal with all of that. if you look at a function like the legal department or operations department, that drew like 9% of respondents. So gone are the days that anybody in supply chain, whether you fit into procurement or logistics or wherever you fit in, can say, oops, you know, if we operate in an ethical behavior, it's going to increase the cost, which is not necessarily the case. If you have a solid policy or ethics policy in place, statistics prove to you that you as a supply chain person within the company, you own ethics. You own the problem in the company. You are the people that's more influential than anybody else within an organization to make sure that you have an ethical supply chain, because the ethical part of supply chain ultimately influences the bottom line of the company, not necessarily because it's the cheapest product. You'll soon find out, and Tanya used a few examples of where people will buy and will not buy. This is 2020. This is not 1920. And I make the statement here today is supply chain, and we can get comments on that, but I make the statement today, supply chain owns ethics. Within an organization, you, the supply chain people, are more influential than anybody else within a company when it comes to ethics.
Daniel, you are 100% spot on. You're 100% spot on.
I'm sorry, I disagree that supply chain owns ethics. My issue with that is that we're saying then everybody else in the company doesn't have to have a responsibility around the ethical requirements of a company. The ethics are owned by every single individual within the company, and absolutely supply chain has a huge impact and more of a touch point. But you can't have your finance team thinking that actually it's not their problem and just ignore it. So, sorry, contradictory there from my point.
No, it's not. Sorry, I have to disagree with your point. But let me just make a statement. My statement is not to say, one thing is owning it in terms of who has the biggest responsibility. Another thing is saying responsibility is not shared by, the responsibility is with everybody. Fact. But statistics show it in the world, and I can give you the statistics. There's research done by the Supply Chain Management Review as recent as last year. And so the view is, in terms of impact, in terms of influence, supply chain has a real ownership responsibility in terms of it. So I understand your point, but I don't say for 1 minute that nobody else is responsible.
Okay. So to your point, Sharon, yes, everybody is ethically accountable and responsible, and you're not wrong there either. Monica?
So while we're waiting for Monica, Tanya, if I can
sorry.
my 5 cents. I agree with both Sharon and with Daniel, okay? And the issue in my opinion is we are so focused on cost as an industry or as industry, and without understanding the detail around supply chain and all of the steps and the processes within supply chain. If we change our focus to flow and we focus purely on the flow and making sure that we support that flow through the system, the cost of your goods landed can be so much more cheaper, but your product can be that much more cost effective that you can still be, as Daniel said, you can still be competitive in the marketplace and still be ethical if you use the correct tools.
Okay, Monica, we ready for you?
Sorry, I was struggling to get myself unmuted there. No, I was just thinking how appropriate this topic is for today in the light of what happened yesterday in Lebanon with those stuff exploding in the warehouse. And I was just thinking how even though, the statistics are showing that consumers are becoming all the more aware of, where is my stuff coming from, people that are developing apps now that are tracing.
Monica, we've lost you.
We have those cases where we just see where corruptness in a country can really have a very negative influence on a supply chain. And supply chain is so important, because our supply chains go into communities, and that's why that explosion could, affect so many people's homes and stuff. And that was just, something that couldn't be worked out between, politicians and countries. And so I think there's definitely still a lot of work to be done in the supply chain. You can just see that in the effects that it had yesterday in Lebanon. So, yeah.
Thanks, Monica. No, 100% right. There's still lots of work that needs to be done. I'm definitely not saying for 1 minute we're not even, I don't even think we're close. We've got a long way to go. So it's easier said than done. So how do we make it a reality? If you look at the scale and complexity of the supply chains of today, it's mind-boggling. So if you look at Walmart, for example, 100,000 suppliers, a network comprising of manufacturers, distributors, subcontractors from different countries across the world with different laws and regulations. So how do you, as a company, regulate that ethically and make sure that your suppliers and subcontractors are compliant to your ethical requirements? I mean, just think about that for a minute. 100,000 suppliers. And I think there are companies here that have also big networks of suppliers, distributors, contractors, whatever the case is. I mean, that's a big job. That's not a small job. That's a big job. It's like having your own police service or policing system to keep an eye out on what's going on. I mean, and let's be honest, that's not feasible. We don't want to have to be doing that. But how do we ensure compliance of ethics? So I just park that thought for a moment. So if we look at actions, and I think some of this came into some of the discussion that Dave was talking about with regards to flow, simplifying processes, efficient planning. I mean, obviously planning is a key component to this. Visibility into supply actions. How far into your supplier's supply chain can you see? Do you know what's going on? Optimizing transport routes to reduce fuel consumption. How much collaboration is actually really happening with regards to that? I know that it's not as effective in the industry as it could be, and there's work to be done there. And then monitoring environmental risks. I mean, that again is a job on its own to keep an eye on the ground to that. And then we've got the technology. So that's an essential component. If you look at the Internet of Things, you look at blockchain, and all those things. So I mean, if you look at the little blockchain here on your right, so I am by no stretch of the imagination a fundi at all on blockchain. In fact, it actually boggles my brain. But I listened to a webinar recently where they talk about all the different ledger numbers and how they move across, and if something happens, then there's an alert that goes all the way back. I mean, it's a massive chain of ledgers or recordings that happen that are supposed to help us with ethical accountability of suppliers, etc., etc. So I don't know that much of the blockchain thing is happening from a South African point of view. We are typically slow adopters of these types of things. I know there was talk that in Saudi they were going to be full on blockchain within the next couple of years, but that remains to be seen. So that's definitely something that we all need to be looking into.
Tanya, if I can just add again,
Yes.
in terms of traceability, there has been for many years in the pharmaceutical industry for the last 30 to 40 years, and for about the last 20 years in the food industry, it's been mandatory to be able to trace your product from cradle to grave. In case of a recall. And there was an incident in about 2004 where somebody had laced, or they had threatened that they had laced certain products with a poison in one of the pick and pay stores. And I was working with one of the manufacturers on the coating system for a packet of chips. And we got the call on a Friday afternoon, and we had to go and give them complete traceability with all the certificates of analysis, certificates of conformance for all the products, right back to the source, the actual plantation that it was sourced from, so that we could prove that the ingredients we used was according to specification. And in the pharmaceutical industry, it's been around forever because of patient safety. It's always been done that you've got to have full traceability of your product in exactly that same manner. I think that at some point in the future, in order to simplify stuff, it's going to move to blockchain, because most of it is manual, and it is volumes of data that have got to be kept. And all your certificates of analysis will come in a paper form along with your shipping documents. And then you've got to test everything according, to make sure that it complies to that C of A. And then you've got all of those test reports. So it's going to drive us in that direction, that we move to blockchain and get everything electronic.
Yeah, I think it's the only way we're gonna manage it. In one of the sessions that I was in recently, there was talk about if you go to, for example, one of the, like the army or one of those sort of organizations, they still do things on those little what are those cards that they used to do transactions on, receiving and passing of stock, those little
the good old Cardex system.
Does it not give you the absolute shivers just to think about it? Okay, but if we look at how COVID could have impacted ethical supply chains, we talked about a bit of that with Ivan, in terms of suppliers and having to change suppliers, possibly, bring in different labor, the pool of labor, employees, that sort of thing. So I don't know, there are different discussions, I guess, to be had around that. But these are some of the actions that we need to be thinking about taking. Ivan?
You mind? Yeah, just maybe if we look at from a freight forwarder side or a shipping company's perspective, a lot of the innovation in the industry has always been driven by the client's needs. So like everybody's been saying, and the feedback they've given, if the pharmaceutical industry, for example, that was the requirement put in place to make sure that the product itself is safe and there's traceability to it. So I think if clients start, in my perspective from a client, or the importer or the exporter puts kind of their foot down and says that I am going to follow the ethical route and I need to source it from the right place, I think the industry will follow. Yes, cost is always a factor, but one thing that most of us have become quite resilient to is the fact that we are able to make plans and get different alternative options, and look at networks, and then obviously get the price that makes it reasonable for that market. So yeah, it's somewhere somebody has to make the decision and say, I will only sell ethical products, or like some of the industries is how we put on the labels what the ingredients are in the food. The more that we start enforcing these regulations onto things, that you won't use products, or you're not allowed to sell products in South Africa that have child labor involved, I think that would drive those companies to make a plan. I don't know.
No, you are right, but I think it's a big ask. I don't know how far off we are from achieving something like that, but again, it's an industry driven thing, and if we all get behind it and we all drive and push for it, you know, it's something that it's possible to achieve maybe sooner than later at this stage. So I want to, Daniel was talking about some surveys that have been done, and the survey on the role of ethics. So this research was conducted by Peerless Research Group in conjunction with Supply Chain Management and Review Magazine and APEX, not ASCM. Results were based on 710 respondents. Okay, so I've included the link here, and we'll include this in the follow-up email for you. I would encourage you to all go and have a look at it. It really is quite interesting. So I've taken some of that into this presentation because I think some of the statistics are quite interesting to look at. So of these companies that were asked, 62% of respondents were based in the US. The remaining 38 represented all regions in the world in more than 27 countries and more than a dozen vertical industries. So that's quite good coverage. How important to your organization are supply chain ethics? Half extremely important, 30% very important. So the percentage of not so important is actually relatively small. So I think that companies are identifying that this is important and they need to be doing it. Whether they're actually actioning it or not, or getting it done is a different story. So if we move on and we look at which of the following practices, principles is your organization now following? I mean, if you look at the list of ethical challenges that we face, it's long. Child labor, forced labor, human rights abuses, ethical sourcing, corruption, bribery, developing and employing environmentally friendly technologies. This is an enormous list, but if you look at the place where the focus is, eliminating discrimination in the workplace. So let me ask you as a group collectively, do you think that that is something that should be top of the list? Would that be your first choice, or would you have chosen something else to be top of the ethical list? Any comments? No?
I think it's actually just as important as ethical sourcing, discrimination in the workplace, especially in South Africa.
Okay, thank you, Kia. And it's interesting that this is a study that's predominantly a lot US based as well as across the globe, but discrimination is obviously a big key driver to the ethical factor, and the environmental responsibility next and labor after that. Corruption only in fourth place. So it's very interesting to see how companies are focused or driving their efforts in terms of ethics. So what are the ethical priorities that they're looking at the present time and in the next 2 years? So this survey was done 2018. So you're looking at between 2018 and now 2020. Currently now, safeguarding against corruption 74%, in 2 years 77. I mean, that's not a major shift. Responsible labor practices, environmental sustainability, defending human rights. They don't compare the discrimination in the workplace element in here. These are the areas that they focus on to show the statistics. But I think in the detailed presentation that's done, you can find all of them. But there's not a massive amount of growth if you look at the figures going from 74 to 77% in a 2-year period. So if you're not safeguarding against corruption and you're only looking to gain 3% or 2% on that, what are you really doing? Look at that as a key issue in our economy in South Africa and certainly in the continent. That's seriously not enough effort, as far as I'm concerned. but that's my opinion. So I don't know whether this is actually being done here in South Africa or Africa. If it's being practiced, but they talk about compensation. So there's an interest in tying compensation to achieving ethical results, especially at senior management level. So for the executives to ensure that they are compliant from an ethical point of view. And this will have a great impact on ethics in the supply chain, and possibly could become a standard operating practice by 2024. So it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. I personally am not aware of any organizations that have adopted this. Anybody here in the organization know of any organizations that have adopted this policy? Still an unknown for us. So lots of work to be done in that department. Okay. And here, this is, Daniel spoke to this. So which area is most responsible for ethical supply chain compliancy? And when we talk about supply chain compliancy, we're talking about all the elements of the supply chain from end to end. So supply chain, 31%, and then finance only at 3%. So yes, supply chain is a key driver and a key responsible holder of this area, and needs to look out for it. A lot less so in the other corporates, 23%. Procurement surprisingly at 20%. That one kind of baffles me. The 31 versus the 20%. I'm not sure. I don't know, for me, I would see that being the other way around here, but I don't know. So ethical supply chain, like I mentioned in the beginning, is more of a behavior. So do you trust the word of your suppliers and supply chain partners? If they make promises, do they keep them, regardless of the cost to their operation? This is a question you have to ask yourself. Does each link in the supply chain take care of its workers with fair pay, sustainable workloads, and ethical work conduct? Is the sourcing materials done from sources with renewable or low impact extraction methods? Who can certify that they can? When confronted with unethical behavior, does each partner have documented procedures to fix a situation and prevent it in the future? So these are the types of questions that you need to be asking yourself as supply chain professionals when you think about the businesses that you are working with, dealing with, your suppliers, your contractors, your distributors, whatever the case may be. So one of the things that gives you a almost certification is Score Enterprise. And I'm talking to this because we had a presentation yesterday talking about the Score Enterprise certification, and this is by no means a sales pitch. I mean, obviously we are affiliates to ASEM. We are their partner in South Africa, but it is the one and only model that takes all of the different elements into consideration across the end-to-end supply chain in terms of the Score operations model, and it then gives you a certificate of compliance, so to speak, if you want to call it that. So it was previously quite a costly exercise to do, but I believe recently that has changed somewhat. I'm just looking for, no, okay, Jenny's not here. But so they have a assessment that you can do on their website, and again we'll include that in our follow-up email to you with the link to the presentation, whatever we send you, and go and have a look at that and see what those criteria are and what they look like, and if this is something that you've thought about from a business perspective on ethics and how you align. Are you aligned? Is it something you've thought about? Is it not? You know, would you be a complete fail if you had to try and get this certification? And two, I think it was Sharon's point, it's personal. Personal integrity should be a driving force for every individual to make sure that the entire supply chain follows the correct policies. High standards of professionalism. Each member of the supply chain should conduct themselves in a manner worthy of the role to which they have been entrusted. So as supply chain professionals here, it is your responsibility, the majority of your responsibility, to ensure ethical behavior and assume some ethical accountability for your organizations and their supply chains. So as a show of hands, how many of you currently have some form of ethical accountability, ethical input to your organization? How many of you would have an immediate impact yourselves? Sharon, Dave, Daniel, Rolf. That's good to see. That's good to see. So yes, it's personal. And one of the things that we are missing as a profession is professionalization. So if you look, for example, at the engineering fraternity, they are designated. A designation is bestowed upon them for the recognition of their knowledge, competence, skills, and for their behavior code of ethics and code of conduct. Currently, that is not in place for supply chain management. However, it soon will be available. So this is something that SAPIX is busy wrapping up, is a development of a professional framework that you will apply for designations at different levels, and you will be awarded designation if you are then found to be unethical or reported, or whatever the case is. It will be investigated and you could possibly be stripped of your designation. So imagine living in a world now where we sit with all this corruption going on around us. If we had a professional body that had the power to strip people of their designation and basically list them publicly in a database, so that if a company goes and searches and says, Tonya Lamb, what comes up? Designation revoked. There are questions around that. So if we are revoking people for their ethical behavior and making them accountable, wouldn't we be a lot better off in terms of corruption in South Africa? It certainly would help us with that as one step. It would also increase our level of competence and knowledge and skills that we have within our supply chain professionals. And this is where SAPIX wants to take it. This is what we want to do for the profession of supply chain management, not just for South Africa, but Africa. So watch this space. So you are all superheroes. And I think we did a session about superheroes a couple of weeks back. You are all superheroes. And everything that you do every day impacts the lives of everybody. Because everything that happens, everything you buy, everything you get involves the supply chain, from the ATM machines to the medicine at the pharmacy, the bottle of beer that you buy. It's all down to supply chain management. And if we could ensure ethical accountability and behavior in all of that, imagine what a wonderful place it would be. And imagine how much money we would have to turn around our economy and create jobs and just make South Africa and Africa a better place to be. Any comments and thoughts and suggestions on some of the things that I've talked about here? Anybody want to add anything? Everybody's very quiet.
Tanya, if I can say something.
Yes.
If you, based on you mentioned the personal thing, and as well as in Sharon's comments earlier about being a personal thing. If you look at the at those same statistics you put on the slides there of earlier, is that the whether a company has some sort of a policy or not, it seems to be quite a big thing around the world, not only in South Africa. And so when you talk to companies and you ask them, not necessarily the supply chain people, whether they have some sort of a policy in terms of their ethical supply chain behavior, do they have something in place? I think on your presentation, you showed something like 70% say yes. The irony of that is that it's something like, I think 50% of them actually apply the policy. And so, no matter what your policy is and whether you have it in your brochure, whether you have it in your portfolio, it seems like with many companies nowadays, and in Africa specifically, so is that having an ethical policy of sorts, which is some document, some fancy document published by the CEO and all of that, unless everybody believes in that, or everybody, like Sharon mentioned, make it personal, it's not going to really mean anything. It's like window dressing. A few years ago, having an ISO accreditation is something to have on your letterhead. Have it on your website. Now, in companies, the whole ethical thing comes in, and as per your stats there, it shows how big an impact the supply chain portion of the business can have on ethics. And so we need to get away from window dressing when we talk about these things, and make the people in the organizations believe in whatever the ethical or the ethics policy is. We've gone through it in our organization, where we have offices in 34 countries, and that opinion differs from country to country. So it's the whole thing about consistency. You go to a Nando's, you buy a chicken burger in Dubai, and it's of a certain standard. Tonight you fly and you have that same burger in Joburg a few hours later, and it's of a different standard. So consistency is big especially when it comes to ethics. Dave mentioned the big thing earlier of the traceability. I remember when I launched the Nando's concept in the UK many years ago, we had the same thing. They found an ingredient that was in the product, and in the UK something creates alarms. It was a colorant. In South Africa, we don't really think twice about it. If it wasn't for traceability, and then we would never fix it. But coming back to ethics within an organization, it's something that everybody has to believe in, and it has to be punted by the role players in the organization. You can't just have a document.
No, I agree with you. It's one thing to say you've got a policy to support it, but if you've got a policy, you can have a policy for anything. But if you're not actually actioning or living and breathing it, it literally is just window dressing, and just having it for the sake of having it because you need to tick a box somewhere. It's living it.
Tanya, could I quick comment, please?
Absolutely.
In bigger companies, corporations like mine that I work for, a lot of the buying or a lot of the decision making regarding which vendor to use or what vendor to use, it happens at a director level. So, we practice absolute ethics. I know my company practices it as far as I know, but we are not, I'm middle management, but we can't just go and choose a supplier or a vendor. Most of these decisions are made at director level, at finance, and they choose the supplier, they choose the vendor, they choose from where you buy what, and you are just informed. These are the three options. You're going to have to use one of these. So that is one of the, I would say, not an obstacle, but that's one of the conditions we have in a bigger organization. In a smaller organization, there's much more options, it's more transparent and things like that. So yeah, that's just one point I wanted to make.
Thank you, Rolf.
Tony, I agree with Rolf on that one. I mean, with these centralized organizations where the procurement happens even in another country where, you know, it's one of those where you get given options and that's about it, you know. And it does get difficult because from that point of view. But yeah, I agree with Rolf on that.
Yeah, no, I understand that definitely is a challenge when you are just at the bottom and they've made all those decisions at the top and this is what you're told to do. Daniel, did you want to add something? You're off mute.
Yeah, someone made a comment. I can't remember on the chat about. Oh yeah, it was Mamkele about apps and software to look at the ethical compliance and those kind of things, which is it's becoming quite a big thing. What we found in our organization is that we are blessed with a central policy, which then we adapt on a regional basis because things differ from country to country. But what we found that when it comes to monitoring the ethics of, for example, a supplier, because I think more and more with outsourcing becoming a far bigger thing with companies in especially when it comes to supply chain, is that more and more you have to know or your credibility is influenced by the supplier you use. And we found that the more we outsource, you know, the further away you are from the supplier. You buy in India, you buy in China, you manufacture in Italy or in Germany and all these kind of things. And the electronic media is actually becoming a way at the moment in COVID situation. We are actually doing virtual quality inspections in other parts of the world. And the engineer sits in Joburg in my Midrand office. Wow. And so it's unfortunate to hear from our colleagues that in big organizations, you know, these type of decisions are still top down. I'm blessed to say that we've adapted the central policy that suits us and locally we make those kind of decisions. But for us, what we also found is that the amount of effort you spend up front in going into the good or the partnership with a particular supplier saves you a lot of hassle down the line. So we spend a lot of time evaluating new partners, new suppliers. And then from the start, we make it very clear to them how we will monitor their compliance to our ethics or whatever the situation is. So it's spend the time, you know, where you are able, and I have sympathy and empathy with the two partners that mentioned that they are dictated to. But for those that have an ability to say, spend the time up front, pick the right partner, not necessarily always the cheapest partner.
Thank you, Daniel. Good points made. Maybe if for those organizations that do have central purchasing and you are literally just down the bottom and they're pushing the supplies towards you, you know, maybe they'll adopt some sort of compensation framework that will help the higher level to adopt suppliers that are compliant. At the end of the day, as the customer, I mean, you hold the reins. You know, you are the one that should dictate and decide. You are the one that says that you need to be compliant in X, Y, and Z. The problem is policing it and watching it and making sure that it's being done.
Maybe if I can also add to that, I think something that is going to become increasingly more important is for companies to be a little bit more loud about you know, the stuff that they're doing that's ethical. Because some companies are, you know, they're just good companies and they just try to do things the right way, but they're not being loud enough about it. So they just accept that's the way you should do it. You know, that's just business as usual, but it's not. And I think if companies are just a bit more, you know, loud about when they're using local suppliers or when they're implementing ethics into their business, I think that'll definitely help.
No, that is a very good, sorry. That is a very good point. That's a very good point. And people need to stand on the podium and shout from the rafters and claim that accolade, because it's becoming increasingly more important. And the more people know about it, the more people are going to support those products and those organizations. So,
Tanya, can I make a quick comment before you go to your last slide?
You can, indeed.
I'm happy to hear what Monica said, because I have found in the last couple of weeks with all these, if you put the news on South African TV, you hear scandal, and I guess I think it sounds to me like it's the highest percentage, most probably 80-90% is supply chain related, you know, in terms of political interference or unscrupulous supply chain methods applied. And the problem with that is it's not only us seeing those TV news. My colleagues around the world talks to me and say, what the hell is going on? We've just signed a major project earlier in this week for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the first question I was asked in a Skype meeting when I punted local supply, South African supply, South African fabrication, because the rand dollar and all kinds of reasons, it's near our office, blah, blah, blah. The first question I was asked, what about what's happening in South Africa? How are you going to avoid it? So in terms of supply chain, procurement, these kind of things, I think is going to become even more difficult for us to stand our ground. And so what Monica says about companies has to celebrate, has to make their voices heard where they do well in it. I think that's very, very important for us.
It definitely is. It definitely is. So Monica, if you're one of those organizations, you need to shout out from the rafters. In fact, as SAPEX, if we are able to verify, if there's a manner in which it can be verified. In fact, once the SCORE enterprise is up and going and companies are using it, we can shout it from the rafters. Because, I mean, we obviously need to have some sort of verification that this is the case and everything's not hunky-dory is probably not the right word, but all ethically above board. You know, SAPEX is definitely behind you and stand and shout and dance about your organization and all the right things that you are doing. So just to wrap up and conclude on the last slide, I've been talking about the Africa Supply Chain in Action event, 19th, 20th August. You have to get on board. It is going to be absolutely incredible. The response has been amazing. The interaction has been incredible. We've got an absolutely fantastic lineup of speakers. And for now, we have a special for women, celebrating women in supply chain. And you get a 50% discount off booking. That's the reference there to get your 50% off booking. If you want to book and you haven't taken note of this, just drop me a note. But, you know, if we're talking about something like ethics, this is a topic that's going to come up on a large scale at this event. But this event is not just a 2-day event. This event will carry on, not as an event, but as a movement's not the right word. So we call it African Supply Chain Action Nation. So it's going to carry on for 6 months. We'll use the platform on which the conference is going to be hosted, and we will run regular webinars. We will have discussion forums. We will have Expo Open Days. We'll have all sorts of engagements and activities. And these types of discussions need to be had with not just us here, but with our peers in Africa. And together, let's have these discussions and let's see how we can make a difference in terms of the ethical element in South Africa and Africa. So if you haven't registered yet, please do. We'd love to see you there. I think that's all from me. If anybody has any other comments, Jenny?
Hello. I'm sort of flicking in and out today because Supply Chain Now Radio has been doing an interview with Ramatu from Kaduna State, and they just talked about some of the amazing work that Zapix is doing in Africa, et cetera, and they gave a really good plug to the Africa Supply Chain Action event. But one thing that I thought was really interesting was someone made a comment saying that they'd been told that in their career planning and building that a stint working in Africa is a really good idea from a supply chain professional because they can come and teach Africans about supply chain management. So I made a comment back. I said it very nicely. And I said, well, maybe there are quite a lot of people in Africa who could teach you about supply chain management. So I think that, you know, ethics is one thing. Ethics is one thing, but it's also, we sell ourselves short so many times. So come, just use these platforms and boast and show our knowledge and show our expertise. Don't wait to be asked. Let's get more vocal. Okay, that's me gone, done. Thank you for listening.
I think we all agree. Kia, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to say thank you to Jamie for putting us forward like that. That's very true. We sort of sell ourselves short, Africa. We do it quite often. You know, we think, oh, the UK and the US, they've got more knowledge, and we can also teach them a thing or two.
Absolutely. We have some incredible solutions here in Africa. And if you attend the African Supply Chain Action event, you'll find out more about them. So guys, thank you for being with us this afternoon. Thanks for sharing your ideas, your thoughts, your comments. We appreciate the time that you invest with us to spend in our community, and we hope to see you all next week. So cheers, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Bye.